Listen carefully, something's inside. Caleb Walker muttered to himself as he paused before the cold steel door of Unit B-17. The night was dense with fog, and the gravel crunched softly under his worn leather boots with every cautious step. Rain had slicked the asphalt, reflecting the flickering yellow light from the lone lamp at the edge of the storage lot, and each drop seemed to hiss quietly as it hit the rusted metal roof above. The air smelled faintly of wet pine from the surrounding Virginia woods, mixed with the tang of old oil and dust that clung to the walls of the long-abandoned facility. Ranger, the German Shepherd K9 by his side, had been quiet until now, ears pricked and tail rigid, body low and tense, muscles coiled like springs beneath his sable coat. A soft, rhythmic bark cut through the night, 3 short notes followed by a pause, and then a longer, lingering sound that made Caleb freeze. He knew that rhythm. He had heard it years ago during his tours overseas, a signal K9s used to communicate when sight was impossible, when discretion was required, when danger was near but not yet visible. Caleb leaned in closer, letting the damp wind bite at his face, and listened. Ranger's amber eyes flicked toward the door repeatedly, nostrils flaring as if sniffing for a presence beyond the steel. Every instinct in Caleb's body screamed that this was not ordinary, that the sound of those barks carried weight, a message embedded in the cadence, a call for attention that demanded action. The storage units stretched in a long, shadowed row, doors lined up like tombstones in the mist, some slightly ajar, most sealed shut with the remnants of old padlocks. But Unit B-17 was different tonight. The new lock gleamed faintly in the lamp's halo, and yet the dog's focus never wavered. Caleb's hand brushed against the worn fabric of his jacket as he took a breath, the air heavy and cool, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of rusted hinges and forgotten memories. His mind wandered briefly to the K9 handlers he had known, the missions, the quiet nights in foreign deserts, the way Ranger had once been partnered with his late brother Ethan, the man who had taught him more about trust than anyone else. Ranger let out a soft whine and pressed against his leg, then sat, shifting slightly to gaze up at Caleb as though confirming his resolve. Caleb's heart tightened, a mix of anticipation and unease threading through him like the fog curling around the storage lot. He approached the door slowly, boots crunching, fingers brushing the cold steel, feeling the faint vibration of the dog's claws raking against the wood behind the door. The bark came again, insistent now, urgent, and Caleb could almost hear the story being told in the cadence, the silent plea for attention that only someone who had served alongside a K9 could interpret. The night seemed to deepen, the fog thickening, shadows lengthening as the lamp flickered, casting eerie shapes across the concrete floor, and Caleb whispered under his breath, "Hold on, boy, I'm coming." And the bark shifted, a higher note, almost joyous, as if Ranger knew he had understood. Every hair on Caleb's neck prickled as he stepped back slightly, letting Ranger take the lead, tail stiff, head low, eyes never leaving the door, muscles rippling with readiness. The ambient hum of distant traffic was muffled by the dense air, punctuated only by the sound of dripping water and the faint creak of metal in the wind. Caleb felt the weight of solitude, the responsibility of knowing that whatever lay behind that door was waiting for him and the dog alone, a secret locked away for years, silent until tonight. He glanced at Ranger once more, amber eyes meeting his, a quiet understanding passing between them, an unspoken promise that they would face whatever was hidden together, that courage could be measured not by size or strength, but by loyalty, by trust, by the quiet determination that radiated from the dog's tense frame. Caleb exhaled slowly, letting the chill air fill his lungs, and then, with a hand steady despite the tension threading through his arms and shoulders, he traced the edge of the lock and listened, every sense heightened, every nerve alert, knowing that a single moment of hesitation could mean missing the first whisper of revelation, the first sign that whatever had been hidden so long was now ready to be discovered, and Ranger let out a final, sharp bark, 3 short notes, a pause, and one long, lingering call that echoed through the mist, carrying Caleb's heartbeat along with it. And in that echo, he felt the pull of the mystery waiting just behind the steel, and the night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first turn of the lock, the first glimpse into the secret 17 had guarded so silently for so long. The fog around the storage lot thickened as Caleb Walker took a cautious step back from the steel door, allowing Ranger to inch forward, nose low, sniffing every crack and hinge. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, leaving a thin mist rising from the asphalt that clung to his jacket sleeves and the tips of his dark brown hair. The air carried the faint scent of wet earth and old pine from the nearby forest, mixing with the metallic tang of the lock and rusted steel, creating a sensory map that Caleb absorbed instinctively, every detail a clue. Ranger let out a soft whine, shifting his weight, and Caleb felt the tension in the dog like an electric charge running along a wire. Each echo of the whine seemed to resonate with the vibrations beneath the metal floor, a subtle rhythm that Caleb could not ignore, a signal that something significant lay just beyond his reach. His fingers traced the edge of the door again, feeling the faint ridges of the padlock, slick with rainwater, as his boots pressed into the small puddles forming around the concrete slabs. A distant owl hooted from the tree lean, and the occasional drip from the corrugated roof above punctuated the stillness, a natural percussion to the anxious energy surrounding them. Caleb crouched slightly, letting Ranger move a few steps ahead, watching as the dog's ears twitched in perfect synchronization with the next soft scrape from inside the unit, each sound like a heartbeat counting down to revelation. He remembered how Ranger had been trained for subtle alerts, how during Ethan's time in the military the dog had been able to distinguish the faintest shifts in air pressure or the quietest footstep among hundreds, a skill that now seemed invaluable. Caleb exhaled. Slowly, the condensation of his breath mingling with the mist, his eyes scanning the dim light that reflected off the metal walls, each surface a canvas for shadows that seemed to twist with intention, as if the building itself held its own secret. The soft bark came again, a single note followed by a pause, then two quick clicks that Caleb interpreted as a deliberate pattern, a coded signal he had not heard in years. Ranger's tail remained low, bristled slightly along the spine, and the dog's muscles tensed, signaling imminent discovery. Caleb felt the old instincts of a Marine reawakening, the precise attention to detail, the patience honed through years of field operations. As he listened for anything else, every sound amplified against the oppressive silence of the empty lot. In that quiet, he noticed subtle disturbances on the dusty concrete, faint scuff marks, small impressions as if something or someone had shifted inside recently. Ranger's eyes locked on the faint shimmer of the metal wall across from the door, the way his head tilted, the subtle lift of a paw, and Caleb understood that the dog was not just indicating presence, but directing his attention, guiding him toward an area overlooked by casual observation. The wind carried a hint of cleaner air from a slightly ajar window in the far corner of the facility, a contrast to the damp, metallic smell of the storage units, and Caleb noticed a faint glow reflecting off a pile of abandoned crates, barely illuminating shapes within the shadows. He stepped closer, heart steady but senses heightened, feeling the weight of isolation and anticipation press against him, as the realization settled that whatever Ranger had detected was not ordinary, that it carried meaning, urgency, and perhaps a connection to the past Caleb had long tried to put behind him. The dog barked again, a low, steady note, followed by a soft scratching at the floor, and Caleb recognized the subtle cues, the language only he and Ranger could understand, a silent conversation that spoke of protection, guidance, and the promise of revelation. Each second stretched, the night amplifying every minute movement, every subtle sound, as Caleb adjusted his stance, the damp air clinging to his skin, listening intently, feeling the pulse of the place through the soles of his boots and the tip of his fingers grazing the cold metal. Ranger pressed closer, nudging Caleb with his nose, eyes bright, alert, as if confirming that he was ready to move forward, to uncover the hidden truth with patience and precision. The distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a stray dog faded behind the intensity of the moment, leaving only the fog, the rain, and the locked door concealing what Caleb knew would change everything, a secret waiting silently, coaxed into attention by the unwavering vigilance of a loyal companion. Caleb's gaze swept the row of storage units, the shadows dancing against steel, and he felt the weight of expectation, the careful balance of caution and curiosity, The familiar tug of responsibility that had defined his life as a Marine and now guided him through the mystery that Ranger was determined to reveal. Every breath drew the damp air deeper into his lungs, each heartbeat a rhythm aligning with the dog's signals. And as the subtle creak of the lock and the scrape of metal whispered through the mist, Caleb felt the quiet, undeniable certainty that the moment of discovery was imminent, that Ranger had led him here not by chance, but by purpose, and that whatever lay behind the door was waiting for him to acknowledge its presence, to see it, and to understand. The first voice Caleb heard did not come from behind the door. It came from the far end of the row, carried thinly through the rain. "You are not supposed to be back here." Caleb turned slowly, one hand still resting near the cold edge of the steel frame, while Ranger shifted in front of him with the quiet precision of a trained guardian. A man stood beneath the flickering security light at the corner of the storage office, tall and narrow in a dark raincoat, his gray hair combed neatly despite the weather, one hand tucked inside his coat pocket as if he had been standing there longer than Caleb realized. Victor Harlan owned the facility, though Caleb had only spoken to him twice since taking the overnight security job, and both times the man had carried himself with the polished impatience of someone who believed every door, every lock, and every silence belonged to him. His face was pale in the yellow light, almost waxen, and his eyes moved quickly from Caleb to Ranger, then to the bright new lock on Unit B-17. "I heard something," Caleb said, keeping his voice level. So did the dog. Victor gave a small laugh, too dry to be friendly. "Old buildings make noise. Pipes settle. Raccoons get into the walls. You should know that by now." Ranger did not blink. The German shepherd stood stiff beside Caleb, ears forward, nose pointed directly at Victor, and the low sound that rose from his chest was not loud, but it changed the air around them. Victor heard it. His expression tightened for half a second before he smoothed it away. "Keep that animal under control," he said. Caleb looked down at Ranger, then back at the man. "He is under control. That is what concerns me." Rain slid from the lip of the roof in silver threads, tapping against the concrete like fingertips. Somewhere behind the steel door, the faint scraping came again, then stopped, as if whatever waited inside had heard Victor and gone still. Caleb noticed the silence immediately. Ranger noticed it too. His body lowered another inch, not in fear, but in focus. Victor stepped closer, his dress shoes splashing through a shallow puddle. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning, and yet he wore no surprise on his face, no sleepy confusion, no ordinary irritation of a man called from bed. He was dressed as if he had been expecting a night like this. "That unit is restricted," Victor said. "Private property. Sealed for environmental reasons." Caleb glanced at the lock. "Environmental reasons usually come with warning signs. The paperwork is in my office. Then we can look at it together." Victor's jaw moved once, a small tightening near the cheekbone. "That will not be necessary." Caleb let the words settle between them. In the Marine Corps, he had learned that fear rarely announced itself with trembling. Sometimes fear wore a clean coat and spoke in sentences too carefully arranged. Sometimes fear appeared in the way a man answered a question before it was asked. Ranger took one step forward. Victor took one step back. It was subtle, but Caleb saw it, and the old instinct returned like a match struck in a dark room. "What is inside, Mr. Harlan?" Caleb asked. Victor's eyes flashed toward the door, then away. "Nothing that concerns you. A dog is barking in there." "No dog could still be alive in that unit," Victor said, and the moment the sentence left his mouth, the rain seemed to quiet around them. Caleb did not move. He did not need to. Ranger's ears sharpened, and a small breath passed through the dog's nose, almost like a warning. Victor had not asked what dog. He had not denied the unit. He had not wondered how an animal got inside. He had answered a question Caleb never asked. Caleb felt something cold move through him, not the weather, not fear, but recognition. A man who lies too quickly often tells the truth by accident. "Still alive," Caleb repeated softly. Victor swallowed. It was small, almost hidden by the shadows under his chin, but Caleb caught it. "You misunderstood me." "I do not think I did." The light above them flickered again, buzzing as rainwater ran down its metal casing. Beyond the fence, the Virginia woods stood black and silent, and the storage rows stretched into darkness, each closed door holding its own square of shadow. Victor lifted his hand from his pocket, revealing a ring of keys, and for one brief moment the metal glinted under the lamp. Caleb saw one key marked with red tape. B-17. Victor closed his fist around it too fast. Ranger barked once, sharp and clean, not at the door this time, but at the keys. Caleb's chest tightened. The dog knew. Not guessed. Knew. Hand me the key, Caleb said. Victor's voice lowered. Go home, Staff Sergeant Walker. Caleb froze. He had never told Victor his rank. Not during the interview. Not during the paperwork. Not once. The rain kept falling, soft and steady, but the night no longer felt empty. It felt watched. Caleb turned his body slightly, placing himself between Victor and Ranger, and in that small movement, something old and unspoken returned to him, the discipline of standing ground when the truth was close enough to breathe. Behind the locked door, a faint sound rose again, not a bark this time, not a scrape, but something smaller, thinner, almost swallowed by the walls. Caleb leaned toward it, and the world narrowed to the trembling steel, the dog at his side, and the man holding the key too tightly. Then, from inside the unit, a whisper slipped through the seam beneath the door, fragile as a candle in the rain. Please. Victor went still. Ranger pressed forward. Caleb's hand closed around the crowbar hanging from his belt, and for the first time that night, he understood that the secret behind B-17 was not waiting to be found. It was waiting to be saved. Caleb did not raise the crowbar at first. He held it low, close to his thigh, while the rain whispered over the roof, and Victor Harlan stood several feet away with the key ring locked inside his fist. The whisper from behind the door had been so faint that a man who wanted not to hear it could have called it wind. But Caleb had heard enough prayers in hard places to know the difference between a sound and a soul. Ranger knew too. The German shepherd pressed his nose to the seam beneath the steel door, inhaled once, then backed away and pawed sharply at the concrete. Caleb crouched beside him, keeping one eye on Victor, and saw what the dog had found. Half hidden in the dirty water under the door was a small strip of pink ribbon, soaked through, its edges frayed, one side marked with mud, and something darker that rain had thinned but not erased. Caleb picked it up between two fingers. It was the kind of ribbon a child might tie around a ponytail or a backpack zipper, soft once, bright once, now trembling in the rain between his hand and the yellow security light. Written across it in uneven blue marker was one word. Grace. Caleb felt the name settle inside him like a bell struck in a quiet church. Not a thing. Not paperwork. Not pipes or raccoons or old metal cooling in the night. A name. A child's name. Victor saw the ribbon and his face lost color so quickly that the shadows around his eyes seemed to deepen. Put that down, he said. Caleb folded the ribbon carefully in his palm. Who is Grace? Victor shook his head. You are making a mistake. Then help me correct it. Walk away, Walker. Ranger turned at the sound of Caleb's name, his amber eyes bright beneath the rain. The dog's breathing had changed, faster now, but still controlled, as if every instinct in him had narrowed to one purpose. Caleb rose slowly. He could feel the old ache in his shoulders, the stiffness from years of carrying weight that never belonged to one man alone, and beneath that ache came something steadier. Duty. Not the shouted kind. The quiet kind. The kind that arrives when someone small says please through a locked door. Open it, Caleb said. Victor's smile flickered, thin and wrong. You do not understand what you are stepping into. I understand there is someone inside. For a moment, only the rain answered. Then the lights went out. The entire row of units fell into darkness at once. The buzzing security lamp snapping off, the office window going black, the wet pavement losing its sickly yellow reflection. Ranger barked sharply, once, and Caleb shifted by instinct, reaching for the flashlight clipped to his belt. The beam cut through the dark in a clean white cone, catching Victor's raincoat as the man took 2 quick steps backward. Power failure, Victor said, but his voice no longer sounded polished. It sounded thin. Caleb swept the light across the door, then down to the concrete. The ribbon in his hand seemed brighter now, impossibly small against the night. From inside the unit came a low sound, not quite a bark, not quite a whine. Ranger answered it with a soft rumble, the way a trained dog comforts another living thing without leaving his post. Caleb placed his palm flat against the steel. It was cold enough to numb his skin. Grace, he called gently. My name is Caleb. I am a United States Marine. I am here with a dog named Ranger. You are not alone. Silence followed, fragile and long. Victor made a quiet noise behind him, something between a scoff and a warning, but Caleb did not look back. He kept his hand on the door. He kept his voice low. Can you hear me? A faint movement stirred beyond the steel. Then came the smallest answer, broken by distance and fear. He said nobody would. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. In that single second, the storage lot vanished, and he saw every empty chair at every kitchen table where a family waits for news, every porch light left on, every photograph handed to strangers with shaking hands. When he opened his eyes, Ranger was looking up at him, still as a statue, reins sliding along the dark line of his back. The dog stepped toward the far side of the door and scratched once, not near the lock, but lower, close to the frame. Caleb directed the flashlight there and saw the second clue. A narrow scrape in the metal. Not old rust. Fresh damage. Someone had tried to make space for air. Someone inside had fought to let the night in, even by an inch. Grace, Caleb said, softer now. Stay close to the back wall if you can. Victor's voice cut through the dark. Do not touch that door. Caleb turned at last. The flashlight caught Victor's face, pale and wet, the key ring shining beside his leg. Then unlock it. Victor did not move. Ranger growled, low and steady, and this time the sound was not anger. It was judgment without words. The rain thickened again, drumming on the roof. Filling the silence, Victor refused to answer. Caleb slid the pink ribbon into the inner pocket of his jacket like a promise, lifted the crowbar with both hands, and placed its hooked end beneath the padlock. Behind the steel, a child drew a shaky breath. Beside him, Ranger planted his paws. And somewhere in that dark row of forgotten doors, Caleb understood that faith does not always arrive as light from heaven. Sometimes it comes as a dog refusing to stop barking, a ribbon under a door, and a man willing to break the silence open. The crowbar bit beneath the padlock with a dull scrape that seemed far too loud in the dark. Caleb braced one boot against the lower frame, rain running down the side of his face, his breath steady in the cold Virginia night. Victor Harlan took another step backward, the key ring still trapped in his fist, but Caleb no longer looked at him. His whole world had narrowed to the lock, the steel, the soft breathing beyond the door, and Ranger, standing close enough that his shoulder brushed Caleb's knee. Grace, Caleb said through the seam, cover your ears if you can. The answer came faint and trembling. Okay. Caleb tightened his grip. He did not swing wildly. He did not rush. He worked the crowbar with controlled force, slow pressure against old metal, the kind of patient strength learned from years of opening jammed crates, stuck hatches, and doors that did not want to yield. The lock groaned. Ranger watched it as if it were a living thing. Victor's voice rose behind them. You will lose your job for this. Caleb pushed harder. I have lost worse. The metal gave a sharp pop, and the padlock snapped open, dropping to the wet concrete with a heavy clatter that rolled down the row like a warning bell. For one heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Ranger stepped forward and placed his nose against the bottom of the door, breathing in deep. Caleb grabbed the handle and pulled. The rolling door resisted at first, swollen by age and weather, then lifted in a shuddering wave, inch by inch, the steel rattling overhead until a dark gap opened into the unit. The smell came first. Damp cardboard. Old dust, bleach, cold air that had not touched open sky in too long. Caleb raised the flashlight, and the white beam traveled across stacked moving boxes, broken chairs, a rolled rug, plastic bins, and a row of wooden crates pushed too neatly against the back wall. For a second, everything looked ordinary in the way forgotten things look ordinary. Then Ranger moved. He slipped under the half-open door, quick but careful, not running out, not escaping, not even pausing to enjoy freedom. His sable coat was wet and dull, his ribs faint beneath the fur, and around his neck hung a strip of old leather where a collar had once been cut away. Caleb felt his throat tighten at the sight of him. This was not a stray that had wandered into trouble. This was a working dog who had endured silence and still remembered his job. Ranger turned back to Caleb, gave one low bark, then vanished between the stacks. Easy, Caleb called, stepping into the unit. The concrete floor was cold under his boots, gritty with dust and damp leaves that must have blown in through cracks no one cared to seal. Behind him, Victor muttered something into his phone, but the screen flashed uselessly in the dark. The power outage had taken the signal booster with it. Caleb moved slowly, sweeping the flashlight across the floor. Small paw prints marked the dust. Beside them were lighter marks, smudged and uneven, as if something had been dragged or shifted with great effort. No violence, no chaos, just the quiet record of someone trying to survive. Ranger appeared again near the back, his amber eyes catching the flashlight like two small lanterns. He stood beside the wooden crates, then reached forward and scratched at one with his paw. Once, twice, 3 times. Caleb stepped closer. "What have you got, boy?" Ranger lowered his head and nudged something on the ground. Caleb crouched and found a broken piece of metal tag half buried under dust, its edge darkened with age, its stamped letters worn but still readable under the beam. E. Walker. For a moment, the unit seemed to tilt around him. The rain outside faded. Victor's voice disappeared. Caleb held the fragment in his palm, feeling its small weight as if it carried the whole ocean. Ethan Walker. His older brother. Corporal Ethan Walker. The Marine who had smiled through every hardship, who had trained Ranger with hand signals and quiet praise, who had been reported lost in a fire 7 years ago along with the dog no one could find. Caleb had stood through the funeral with an empty casket and a folded flag, telling himself that some losses never leave enough behind to hold. And now here was a piece of Ethan's tag in a locked storage unit at 2 o'clock in the morning, beside the dog who was supposed to be gone. Ranger stepped closer, pressing his nose gently against Caleb's wrist. It was not excitement. It was recognition. Caleb's hand trembled once, and he closed his fingers around the tag. "You knew him," he whispered. Ranger gave a soft sound, almost a sigh, then turned back to the crates with sudden urgency. Caleb forced himself to breathe. There would be time for grief later. Maybe. There would be time to understand how the dead had reached into this room. Through a dog's memory and a child's ribbon. But not now. Now there was Grace. Caleb lifted the flashlight higher and noticed what Ranger had been trying to show him. The crates were not leaning against the back wall. They were hiding it. Behind them, the beam caught a thin vertical seam in the plywood, too straight to be natural, too clean to belong in a forgotten storage unit. A false wall. Victor saw it from the doorway and went silent. That silence told Caleb more than any confession could have. Ranger scratched again, harder this time, then looked over his shoulder, eyes bright with command. Caleb tucked Ethan's broken tag into his jacket beside the pink ribbon, set both hands against the nearest crate, and pushed. Wood scraped across concrete. Dust lifted into the flashlight beam like pale smoke. From somewhere behind the hidden wall came a small breath, close enough now to be real, weak enough to break him. "Mr. Caleb?" Grace whispered. Caleb swallowed the ache in his chest and kept moving the crates. "I am here," he said. "Ranger found me," she breathed. Caleb looked down at the German shepherd, standing firm in the dark after 7 lost years, and understood something that made his eyes burn. Ranger had not been barking for himself. He had been keeping Ethan's last mission alive. The false wall gave way slowly under Caleb Walker's steady pressure, revealing a narrow alcove tucked behind the crates. The space was just large enough for a small person to huddle in, and there, curled on a faded blanket, was Grace Miller. She looked up with wide, frightened eyes, cheeks streaked with tears and smudges of dust, holding a small stuffed animal pressed to her chest as if it could shield her from the world. Ranger immediately stepped between Caleb and the child, nose to the ground, ears forward, alert but calm, as if signaling that the danger had not yet passed. Caleb crouched slowly, letting the flashlight illuminate the alcove, noting every detail, the small scuff marks on the concrete where Grace had shifted, the damp blanket that smelled faintly of soap and rain, and the tiny pair of shoes tucked neatly beside her. "It is okay," Caleb whispered gently, his voice low and even. "We are here. You are safe now." Grace hesitated, eyes darting past him, then down at the dog. Ranger let out a soft rumble and nudged her gently with his nose, a reassurance that had a weight far greater than any human words could carry. Caleb reached a hand slowly toward her, careful not to startle, and she allowed him to take it, her fingers small and cold against his glove. The moment was quiet, yet every sense was alive. The smell of wet metal and pine from outside, the faint sound of rain dripping off the roof, the subtle shift of air through the cracks in the storage unit. Caleb swept the flashlight over her small frame, noting that she was unharmed physically but exhausted and anxious. He scanned the alcove further and saw that Ranger had already positioned himself so that the child could not move too close to the door, keeping her protected without restricting her. Caleb breathed in, letting the calm steadiness of the dog guide him as he knelt, eyes level with Grace. "My name is Caleb," he said softly. "This is Ranger. We are not leaving until you are completely safe." Grace blinked and nodded once, pressing the stuffed animal tighter to her chest, her lips trembling slightly. The unit was quiet now except for the soft patter of rain and the faint creaks of the steel above them. Caleb studied the surroundings, crates stacked carefully against the back wall, some slightly tilted, revealing glimpses of shadows behind, and realized that Ranger had been guiding him not randomly, but with purpose, showing him the safest path, indicating where the floor was solid and free of debris. Victor Harlan stood just outside, silent now, shifting from foot to foot in the dim light, the key ring still clutched in his hand. Caleb did not look at him. His focus remained on Grace and Ranger, sensing the depth of the bond between the child and the dog that had led him here. He adjusted his grip on the flashlight, directing the beam along the walls, finding signs of where Grace had pressed herself into corners for warmth, where she had tried to create a barrier with boxes to feel protected. Ranger moved once, circling Grace slowly, checking the perimeter. With precise steps, nose low, tail controlled, eyes never leaving her. Caleb felt a surge of gratitude and quiet awe. The dog had endured months, perhaps years, of solitude and separation, and yet here he was, performing the ultimate act of vigilance and care. Caleb spoke again, softly, giving Grace time to breathe, time to adjust, his tone calm and steady, a rhythm she could follow. "Take a deep breath, Grace. You are not alone. You are not in danger. Ranger and I will stay with you." She took a shallow breath, then another, her small shoulders relaxing fractionally, and Caleb allowed himself a small exhale of relief. The rain outside intensified, drumming on the roof, but inside the unit, there was a bubble of stillness, a pocket of safety formed by his presence and Ranger's unwavering watchfulness. Caleb noticed small things, a toy car under the blanket, a crumpled snack wrapper, evidence that Grace had been alone for some time, yet had managed to survive using every scrap of resourcefulness she could muster. Ranger lay down close to her, chest low to the ground, maintaining a protective stance, and Grace tentatively reached out to stroke his head. The dog leaned into her touch slightly, a gentle acknowledgement of trust and relief, and Caleb watched the interaction with careful attention, noting the subtle cues, the way Ranger's breathing slowed, the tilt of his ears, the softening of his posture, as if he were now certain that she was safe. Caleb scanned the alcove one last time, ensuring that there were no hidden dangers, that the path to the door was clear, that the child could be guided out without unnecessary strain or worry. Then he lifted the flashlight to the ceiling and caught the faint outline of a second seam in the plywood, suggesting the alcove had been purposefully hidden, a secret kept intentionally. Yet Ranger had found it and guided him precisely to the point where discovery was inevitable and salvation possible. Caleb took a final deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility, the intensity of the night, and the quiet, patient courage of a dog who had waited faithfully through years and distance. And he knew that whatever came next, they would leave the unit together, with the bond between man, dog, and child strengthened. The night no longer just a place of shadows, but a space where loyalty and instinct had bridged the gap between fear and safety. Grace did not let go of Ranger when Caleb guided her out from the hidden alcove. Her small hand stayed buried in the thick fur at the side of his neck, and the German shepherd moved at her pace, slow and careful, as if every step had been measured for her strength. Caleb kept one hand near her shoulder without crowding her, the flashlight beam steady ahead of them, cutting across dust, old boxes, and the strange false wall that had concealed her from the rest of the world. Outside the unit, rain continued to fall over the storage lot, softer now, less like a storm and more like a tired witness. Victor Harlan stood near the doorway, pale under the glow of Caleb's flashlight, but he did not come closer. Ranger watched him with a stillness that made words unnecessary. Caleb helped Grace sit on an overturned plastic bin just inside the open door, where fresh air could reach her, but the rain would not. He removed his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The pink ribbon remained safe in his inner pocket, beside the broken metal tag bearing Ethan's name. For a moment, Caleb felt the two small objects pressing against his chest, one from a frightened child, one from a brother the world had buried too soon, and the weight of them made the night feel heavier than the clouds above. Grace looked up at him through tired eyes. "The dog knew your name," she whispered. Caleb knelt slowly. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Her fingers tightened in Ranger's fur. The man kept saying Walker. He said another Walker ruined everything before. Caleb went very still. The air inside the unit seemed to cool another 10 degrees. Ranger's ears lifted at the sound of the name, and his gaze moved from Grace to Caleb, sharp and knowing. Caleb forced his voice to stay gentle. "Did he say Ethan?" Grace nodded once. "He said Ethan should have stayed quiet." The words entered Caleb softly, but they landed deep. Not like a shout, like a door opening in a house he thought had burned down years ago. He turned his flashlight toward the back of the unit, toward the crates Ranger had been clawing at before finding Grace. The dog stood immediately, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment, then moved through the narrow aisle and stopped beside a low metal storage chest tucked behind a rolled carpet. Caleb followed him, each step slow, careful, reverent in a way he did not understand until he reached it. The chest was dented, its lid discolored by age, but not locked. Ranger placed one paw on top of it and looked back. Caleb crouched, lifted the lid, and found a stack of folders wrapped in a torn canvas field jacket. The jacket was olive green, faded along the seams, with a name tape still stitched over the breast pocket. Walker. Caleb's hand hovered above it before touching the fabric. He remembered that jacket. He remembered Ethan wearing it at Thanksgiving, standing on their mother's porch in Ohio, laughing while Ranger sat at his feet, young and proud, and waiting for permission to chase a tennis ball across the frozen yard. That memory rose so clearly that Caleb had to close his eyes. When he opened them, he unfolded the jacket. Inside were paper files, photographs, storage receipts, and a small notebook with Ethan's handwriting across the first page. The letters were firm, slanted slightly to the right, unmistakable. Caleb read the top line aloud, barely above a whisper. "If anything happens to me, follow the dog." The words emptied the room of sound. Grace watched from the doorway, wrapped in Caleb's jacket, Ranger now standing between them like a bridge between the living and the lost. Caleb turned the pages carefully. Ethan had been investigating missing shipments connected to Victor's storage facility, not weapons, not battlefield secrets, but emergency relief supplies, adoption records, medical documents, and names of vulnerable families who had disappeared into paperwork no one questioned. It was not written like a conspiracy. It was written like a Marine doing what Marines do when someone weaker has been left behind. Dates, license plates, unit numbers, notes about suspicious locks changed after midnight. One line, circled 3 times. B-17 is not the end. It is the first door. Caleb looked toward Victor. The man had retreated a few more feet into the rain, but his face told the truth before any court ever would. Ranger gave a low bark, then moved to another stack of boxes and nudged it with his nose. Caleb stood, carrying Ethan's notebook in one hand, and shifted the boxes aside. Behind them, taped under a shelf, was a small digital recorder sealed in a plastic bag. The battery light blinked faintly when Caleb pressed the button. Ethan's voice crackled through static, older, warmer, alive in a way that made Caleb's breath catch. "Ranger, if you get out, find Caleb. He will understand." Caleb lowered his head. He had spent 7 years believing his brother had vanished into an accident, believing Ranger had been lost with him, believing some questions were too broken to answer. But the truth had not died. It had waited in a dog's memory, in a locked room, in a little girl brave enough to whisper. Grace's voice trembled behind him. "Mr. Caleb, was Ethan your brother?" Caleb turned back to her, and for the first time that night, the pain in his face softened into something almost holy. "Yes," he said. Ranger came to him then, pressing his head against Caleb's chest, right where the broken tag and pink ribbon rested together. Caleb placed one hand on the dog's wet fur and held Ethan's notebook in the other. Outside, sirens finally began to rise faintly in the distance. growing closer through the rain. And Caleb understood that Ranger had not simply remembered a command. He had carried a promise across 7 lost years, waiting for the right night, the right door, and the one man who would know that loyalty is sometimes the last witness God leaves behind. Caleb Walker stepped back slightly, letting Ranger move to the edge of the alcove where Grace had been huddled, the dog's body tense and alert, as if sensing more than he could see. Outside, the soft wail of approaching sirens threaded through the rain, distant yet growing, a promise of human help finally on the way. Victor Harlan remained still under the flickering lamp, his face pale, the key ring dangling limply from one hand, no words left to speak. Caleb looked at Ranger, then down at Grace, whose small hand still held tightly to the dog's fur, and he felt the weight of the past 7 years compress into the seconds stretching before them. The broken metal tag and the pink ribbon rested against his chest, tangible proof of loyalty and survival, symbols that had guided him through the uncertainty, and now they were paired with the living proof, a child and a dog that had endured isolation and fear with a single-minded determination. Caleb breathed in the damp night air, scented with pine and wet asphalt, and let his gaze travel across the storage lot, noting the empty units, the shadows stretching long and thin under the lamplight, and the faint shimmer of the false wall that had concealed the alcove. Ranger shifted slightly, letting out a low rumble of acknowledgement, and Caleb understood that the dog had completed the task he had been given years ago, not by accident, not by chance, but by a loyalty that had not been broken by distance, time, or loss. Grace's eyes followed Caleb, and she whispered softly, "He knew I was here." Caleb knelt beside her, his voice steady and calm. Yes, he did. Ranger remembered his first partner and knew who to find. You were never alone, even when it felt like you were. The rain pattered gently on the metal roof, a steady drum that seemed to echo the rhythm of the night, the beat of a truth long hidden finally revealed. Caleb scanned the space once more, his flashlight sweeping across crates, boxes, and the narrow strip of floor cleared by Ranger's precise movements. And he realized how much had been coordinated by instinct, by training, and by a bond that transcended human comprehension. Victor made a sound, half sigh, half acknowledgement, but Caleb did not respond. His focus remained on Grace and the dog, understanding that confrontation was secondary to the task of ensuring their safety. Ranger nudged Caleb's knee, signaling it was time to move forward, and Caleb extended a hand to Grace. "Come on," he said softly. "We are going to get you out of here, together." She let go of the dog reluctantly, climbing to her feet with Caleb's support. The small breeze from the partially open storage unit brushed against her face, carrying the scent of rain and earth and freedom. Ranger stayed close, moving like a shadow, attentive to every step, every movement. Caleb led them toward the steel door, each step deliberate, aware that the past and present converged in this single path from concealment to safety. As they reached the threshold, Grace glanced back at the alcove, and Caleb understood her silent gratitude to the dog who had watched over her, who had not faltered when the world had turned its back. Ranger padded beside them, ears alert, tail held low but firm, a living symbol of vigilance and unwavering commitment. Caleb pulled the door fully open, and the chill night air washed over them, blending with the residual heat of their own presence, the tactile reminder of human and canine persistence. The distant lights of the approaching patrol cars glinted off puddles, red and blue reflections trembling on wet asphalt. Caleb guided Grace carefully, holding her hand, steadying her steps, as Ranger led the way, sniffing the air, ensuring their path was clear, protective, and unyielding. Every sound, every droplet, every soft scuff of boots and paws on concrete carried significance. Caleb breathed slowly, methodically, each inhale and exhale syncing with Ranger's calm breathing, creating a rhythm of assurance, a reassurance to the child and himself that the night's ordeal was nearing its conclusion. As they emerged fully into the open lot, the tension of hours spent in anticipation began to ease, though the weight of discovery and truth lingered in the air like a dense fog. Ranger paused at the edge of the storage facility, looking back once, amber eyes catching the dim lamplight, then turned his attention forward, following Caleb and Grace toward the brighter, safer stretch where help awaited. Caleb glanced at Victor, who made no move to follow, and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that the responsibility for what lay within the units had shifted entirely. Outside, the sirens approached closer, voices faintly audible through the rain, the promise of assistance tangible. Caleb held Grace's hand firmly, guiding her across the lot, the dog moving between them, ever vigilant. The night had been long, tense, and filled with secrets, but through the bond of memory, loyalty, and instinct, they had traversed it together, emerging into the first moments of relief, clarity, and justice, a truth illuminated not by light alone, but by the unwavering courage of a dog who never forgot, and a man who never stopped listening. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, leaving the asphalt glistening under the first hints of dawn, the storage lot empty except for Caleb Walker, Ranger, and Grace Miller as they walked toward the distant glow of emergency lights. Grace's small hand remained tucked in Caleb's, and the weight of the events from the night pressed quietly on both of them, a silent understanding shared across years of memory and instinct. Ranger padded beside them, ears pricked, tail low but steady, alert to every sound, every shift of the mist and shadow, as if guarding not just the child, but the truth that had been uncovered in the hidden alcove. Caleb glanced down at Grace, whose eyes were wide and clear despite exhaustion, the pink ribbon pinned lightly to her jacket, a tangible reminder of her courage and the guidance that had led him here. Victor Harlan was now being escorted by the authorities, his hands raised in passive compliance, the key ring clattering softly with each step on the wet concrete. Yet Caleb did not dwell on the man. His focus remained on what mattered most, the child and the dog who had made this revelation possible. Ranger's eyes followed Caleb constantly, searching for any sign of threat, then returning to the task of comforting Grace, nudging her gently with his wet nose as if to assure her that the danger had passed and safety was real. Caleb led them toward a patrol vehicle where paramedics waited with blankets and warm drinks, the child's small form shielded by the jacket and Caleb's careful guidance. Ranger walked in parallel, taking slow, deliberate steps, keeping a watchful gaze on the surroundings, the dog's breathing steady, a quiet rhythm that seemed to echo Caleb's own. As Grace climbed carefully into the back of the vehicle, Caleb set down the flashlight and allowed himself a moment to absorb the night's events. The cool mist clinging to his jacket, the distant glow of the approaching sunrise brushing the horizon with muted gold and pink tones, the memory of his brother Ethan, of Ranger's loyalty, of every small clue that had led them here, washing over him in a steady tide of relief and reverence. He noticed the way Ranger's coat glistened wet and dark in the early light, the faint ripple of muscles under fur that had waited 7 years to fulfill a promise. Grace leaned forward, brushing Ranger's head softly, and he lowered his ears, letting the touch calm his alertness. Caleb knelt beside her once more, offering a quiet smile. "You did very well," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of both comfort and pride. She pressed her small hand again to his and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Caleb nodded, letting the words settle, understanding fully the depth of trust placed in him by both Ranger and the child. The paramedics began tending to Grace, but Caleb stayed close, observing every movement, noting the care and attention they gave, the way Ranger remained a silent guardian, never straying from the edge of the vehicle. The broken metal tag from Ethan lay in Caleb's pocket, a constant, heavy reminder of the mission completed, of loyalty remembered across years of absence, and he felt a quiet satisfaction that the past had converged with the present in a moment of resolution. Ranger nudged Caleb's hand lightly, then settled at his feet, gaze forward, attentive and serene, a living testament to endurance and devotion. Caleb took a slow breath, watching the morning deepen, the mist lifting slightly, the sun catching drops of water in a soft, scattered shimmer across the asphalt. The patrol officers began questioning Victor in the distance, but Caleb did not look back. His eyes remained on Grace and Ranger, the two who had endured the most and yet remained steady, unbroken. Grace wrapped a small blanket around herself, watching Ranger with awe and trust, and Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the small but firm warmth, a bridge between fear and safety. For a moment, the lot was silent, except for the soft drip of rain from eaves, the distant hum of city awakening, and the steady breathing of a dog who had carried memory, mission, and love across time and distance to reunite them with safety. Caleb exhaled fully, feeling the relief settle in his chest like a slow tide, and looked down at Ranger, amber eyes glinting softly in the morning light. The dog shifted slightly, tail sweeping the ground, and Caleb whispered, "Mission complete, my friend." Ranger gave a small, satisfied exhale and moved closer to Grace, allowing her fingers to stroke his muzzle once more. Together, the three of them, man, child, and dog, stepped forward into the emerging day, leaving behind shadows, locked doors, and the uncertainty of the night, carrying with them a quiet understanding of loyalty, courage, and the enduring power of guidance and trust.